Hello, world history. Welcome to day 4 of Borders. This is going to be the last lecture and assignment for this week. Um, so I'm going to finish talking about the Berlin Wall for today. So for today's assignments, you're going to have a do now, which you're going to do on the next slide. The do now is going to be asking you 4 questions. You're going to watch a short video about the Berlin Wall, and you're going to answer 4 questions using the video. You're also going to have one check for understanding towards the end of the lecture, and then there's going to be an image analysis assignment that's going to be due that you're going to start today. And then I'll give you the instructions for that at the end of the video. Okay. So these are the 4 questions you're going to be answering. 1, how were the 2 regions of Germany divided? Who controlled which part? What happened after the wall was built? Write down 2 impacts. What would happen if you tried to escape? The video is going to give you a few examples, and then what is the symbolism of the wall? Yep.
Of the Second World War, this city became the front line for a different kind of war, the Cold War. For nearly 40 years, Europe was divided between the democracies of the West and the communist states of the East, and Berlin was where the 2 sides met. When Nazi Germany was defeated in 1945, Berlin was divided up into 4 parts by the Allied powers and the Soviet Union. As post-war Germany started to rebuild, 2 countries were formed from the rubble: a free market and democratic West Germany and a communist-controlled East Germany under the influence of Russia. Despite growing tensions between West and East Berlin, Berliners were able to move between the 2 halves of the city to go to work, school or visit family and friends, until one night in August 1961. Overnight, East German soldiers sealed off the border between the 2 halves of the city.
I watched workmen supervised by troops putting the finishing touches to the cement curtain through which no East German can pass.
The first and main shock we had was 61. When they built a wall right through a city. It was not an ordinary wall around a city to protect it from enemies, but it was a prison wall through a city. And we didn't believe this. We thought there is a responsibility of all the 4 allies, and they will hold this city together. But nobody did anything.
Boyfriends and girlfriends, parents and children, whole families suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of the wall. Even streets became divided.
The wall divided the street. So, for example, a young man and a young girl who loved each other couldn't see each other anymore when the wall was built, because the wall was built exactly at the street. And neighbors, families, they could see each other, but they couldn't go to each other because the wall divided the street. And I think this is a symbol for divided Berlin, for divided Europe, and for divided world at that time.
Houses along the border were bricked up. People made desperate bids to escape across the border into the West. Some even died trying. Teenager Peter Fechter was the first to lose his life, shot by border guards.
We saw Peter Fechter bleeding, and nobody helped him. He was right in front of the American soldiers. Nobody helped him. It was on the other side of the world. And it was a question of war and Cold War. Not peace, but Cold War was better than war.
Over the next few years, the authorities strengthened the barriers, and it became known as the Berlin Wall.
You can see the first barrier where after the graveyard. After this, there was electric fence, but if you touched it, you had no idea what happened if you are somebody who wants to flee. But the soldiers in the watchtower, they got a signal that there is somebody. And then came the inner wall, which was not so high, and behind this inner wall, there was something like on the floor with needles on it. So if you jumped over the inner wall, you landed in needles, 10 centimeter high needles. Then original death strip with bunkers and soldiers. They got permittance from their system, from the government, to shoot to everybody who is near there.
As the Berlin Wall became harder to cross, people came up with more and more ambitious ideas to help friends and families escape from East Berlin.
Okay. Oops. Okay. Okay. So remember that you're going to be doing research on a border of your choice next week. The rest of the presentation today is going to model how you should do your research next week. So today and yesterday is modeling for how you should do your research. So our first objective for today is that you're going to be able to analyze the social, economic, and political impact of the Berlin Wall on the people of East and West Berlin. The question you're going to be able to answer is, what impact did the wall have on the East and West Berliners from a political, economic, and social perspective? Okay, so the political impact on East Berlin. So while the wall was up, East Berliners were told that the wall was being used to keep out fascism on the other side. So East Berlin portrayed the wall as protecting the population from fascist, quote, fascist elements that wanted to prevent the building of a socialist state in East Germany. So that's how the East Germany and East Berlin argued that the wall was necessary. There was a totalitarian government with limited rights, freedoms, and they could arrest people for small infractions. So the totalitarian government limited free speech to prevent protests or speaking out against the government. Another political implication was that there was a culture of paranoia in East Berlin. So many lived in constant fear. There were informants telling on their neighbors in exchange for power or possessions. The East Germany and East Berlin saw the U.S. and other capitalist countries as the enemy. So they used a lot of propaganda to frame the capitalist countries as the enemy. More political impacts on East Berlin. So after the wall came down, it came down on November 1989. People were initially very excited to live in a more free country. Right, we're thinking about East Berliners. Some missed their old way of life. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, they missed their old way of life. They had gotten used to the structures that they had, and then some saw they saw some of the ills of capitalism that the communist propaganda had warned them about. Right, so things were not perfect after the Berlin Wall ends up falling. Okay, so some of the economic impacts on East Berlin. So while the wall was up, there were no Western products that could be sold in East Berlin. So this is a lot of the kind of luxury consumer good products. We're thinking about like coffee. We're thinking about jeans, for example. They weren't available in East Berlin while the wall was up. The country also lagged on innovation and technological advances. Remember, they had a lot of catching up to do after World War II, and so this made it difficult for them to innovate and have technological advances. And then East Berlin only contributed 8% to Germany's overall GDP. After the wall came down, unemployment was much higher in East Germany. and in East Berlin generally. East Berliners struggled to find jobs. Factories and businesses were not used to the new regulations, right? So there's new rules, new laws that the previous factories, businesses had to follow. And then if we're thinking about East Berliners, right, they struggled to find jobs because the training that they had, um, the education that they had was different. And then they were not used to the new products. So they started to miss their old way of life. And remember that in their old way of life, the government controlled the economy. Okay. And so they made sure they were responsible for the distribution of products. And that was no longer the case after the wall came down. After the wall came down, people were responsible for acquiring products. Okay. So I'm going to continue to go over the economic impact on East Berlin. So these are statistics on the German economy 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. There's a few economic indicators. So the first one that I'm going to go over is, you see here, monthly disposable household income. That's basically money that each person has to spend in Germany. Okay, so in Western Germany, the currency that they use is euros because they're a part of the European Union. So in Western Germany, the average income per person is 3,617 euros. In Eastern Germany, what is the part of the country that was part of East Germany, people who live in that part of the unified Germany now earn $2,862 a month. Sorry, not dollars, euros. Okay, so there's a huge difference in the economy after the fall of the Berlin Wall. If we also look at GDP per capita, and GDP per capita is pretty much how much money the economy produces in 1 year. So if you take the amount of money that a country produces in 1 year, and you break it down to per person, this would be the difference. So in West Germany, um, each person produces 42,971 euros in a year, for example. And in East Germany, um, the per person capita, each person produces 32,108 euros per year. If we look at unemployment rates, and unemployment rate is pretty much, it tells you the percentage of people who don't have jobs in a country. So in Western Germany, it's lower, right? So that's a better number. If it's lower, that means that there are less people who don't have jobs. So it's 4.8 in Western Germany, 6.9% in Eastern Germany, right? So these three indicators show us that the economy 30 years later is a lot better in Western Germany. And that's going to have an impact on a few other things I'm going to go over. Okay. So some of the social impacts for both sides. So while the wall was up, West Germans called it the Wall of Shame. And they called it that because they thought that it symbolized a lack of freedom. It separated family members, friends, lovers, colleagues, etc. And this was just another kind of arbitrary, just kind of random border that was set up, right? That people didn't expect, kind of similar to what we saw in India, where just a random border is created that separates people that had been together for hundreds or thousands of years. Many tried to escape. 5,000 people were initially successful. 136 people died trying. They were shot if they saw you. And then we kind of briefly saw that in the video today. People had different methods of escape. Okay. So the social impact for people of color. So after the wall came down, there was a rise in patriotism and excitement. That excitement was replaced with racism and the rise of Nazi-like ideologies. So it was this belief, right? There was a strong sense of nationalism and patriotism. Um, So it leads to aggressive youth groups. So there were nationalist groups that ended up blaming others for their problems, right? And we saw some of these problems. I'm just going to go over this quickly, right? You see these problems here with the economic problems 30 years later. So there's a lot of groups. They create the sense of nationalism and then they blame others for their problems. So there are race riots that take place. There's a decline in mental health. People of color, people who are Jewish people, people who are seen as, quote, foreigners or not from Germany, they start to internalize that racism, right? And then it's gotten especially worse in Eastern Germany today, in modern day Eastern Germany. In 2015, Germany received, they accepted thousands of migrant refugees. And so a lot of the hate and blame for the problems that Eastern Germany has is placed on these groups. Okay, so you're going to do your check for understanding next. And it's the same thing that we've been doing all week. So you're answering two questions. One, what social, political, or economic impact did the creation of the Berlin Wall have on people? Sorry, there's a typo there. And then for question two, what social, political, or economic impact did tearing down the Berlin Wall have on people? Okay, so you're going to answer both questions. Okay, so our second objective, and we are almost done with today's lecture, and then I'll introduce the assignment. You're going to be able to analyze and explain what was the symbolism of the Berlin Wall. So what is the symbolism of the Berlin Wall is the question. So the symbolism, three main ideas I'm going to go over. One is that there was an ideological divide between Western democracy and capitalism versus Eastern dictatorship and communism. This word ideological basically has to do with ideas. So there's a divide of ideas, two opposing ideas. Okay. There's also a social divide between freedom and lack of individual rights, right? We have freedom in Western Europe where they have a democracy, they're able to vote. There's free enterprise, right? People have money and they spend it however they want. And corporations, businesses run the economy versus in Eastern Europe, where there's a lack of individual rights. There's a totalitarian government. They don't want people rising up, speaking out against the government, because remember, the government in Eastern Europe controlled the economy. And then the third one is that as time went on, it became a symbol of deep divisions. There's strong distrust and animosity associated with the Cold War, right? So you have the US versus the Soviet Union. Okay. And then, right, you have Western Germany that sides with capitalist countries and the US. And then you have Eastern Germany that sides with communist countries and communist Russia. Okay. So a few pictures of the Berlin Wall today. So these are actual images of the Berlin Wall and what it looks like now. So there's a lot of art that's portrayed on the Berlin Wall. Okay, if you have questions, you're going to be able to ask them here. For your next assignment, it's going to be on Canvas. So you're going to be doing a short Berlin Wall image analysis. Detailed instructions are on Canvas. You're going to go to modules, distance learning, April 14th through the 17th. And then you're going to click on Berlin Wall image analysis.